Welcome back to a Slice of Empathy podcast, a show where we dive deep into conversations that help us navigate life, relationships, and personal growth. Today, we are diving into a topic that so many women can relate to, and that's fertility, pregnancy, and the journey to motherhood. My guest today is Joselyn Rodriguez, a women's health clinician with a deeply personal and professional perspective on fertility. At 34, she and her partner took the leap into parenthood after initially planning to be child-free. While her pregnancy journey was a smooth one in terms of conception, she faced several challenges, including navigating a demanding doctor, a physical therapy program. She underwent surgery for thyroid issues, and even completing rotations while pregnant. Now, as a specialist in women's health, Joselyn is passionate about helping other women on their fertility journey. She'll be sharing her story, breaking down the connection between pelvic floor health as well as conception, and offering insights on how addressing abdominal and visceral scar tissue can improve your fertility outcome. And if you've ever wondered how physical health, stress, and medical conditions can impact your ability to conceive, or if you're just looking for an inspiring story of perseverance, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. I know you mentioned, you became a mother at 34. You initially thought maybe you'd be child-free.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of changed your mind, and what was that journey like for you and your partner?
Sure. So I was in grad school when we were like, okay, we need to make a decision. And we had gone on a trip to Italy and we went all over the Mediterranean, and we were like, okay, this is the trip where we're going to decide, what we want to do. And at that time, like I said, I was in grad school and I was coming to the end, and I didn't want to be that person who started a new profession and then immediately was in maternity leave. And when we had decided, okay, we're not going to have kids, it kind of never felt like the end of that conversation for me. And it always came back, well, are we sure? Are we sure? Are we sure? And I said, you know what? Maybe this is pointing me in the direction that we should have children. And then I told my husband, I said, let's do it. And he was like, okay, let's do it. And it was really that quick for him. It was, okay, you want to do it? We will do it. And it's really been an amazing thing. I love that we waited until we waited. I feel like I'm more mature and I have more patience for my daughter now. We did decide just to have one child, but I feel like we have plenty of love to give.
Oh, I absolutely love that. And my husband and I have kind of been on a similar journey. And just quick backstory, I'm 35 and he's 41. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that probably within the last year or so is when we really kind of had a turning point to where having kids was maybe back on the table. And
Mm-hmm.
we kind of talked about when. For so many years, like yourself, we both thought that we'd be child-free. Actually, it was actually my suggestion initially. And then my husband kind of got on board. And then it actually kind of started off because at one point we're discussing maybe potential surrogacy for my sister-in-law and the feelings that we had surrounding it. And I want to say, again, we're still a couple of years away from really being serious about having kids, but it is something that we want to do within the next probably 4 or so years. So yeah, it was an interesting conversation. And, at that point, I'm probably going to be close to 40, but it's really interesting how that happened because it's something that the role of a mother isn't really something that I saw for myself for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to kind of go back to when you found out you were pregnant. What emotions did you experience?
Yeah. So like I said, I was in grad school and I had kind of figured out the math as to when I would be sitting for boards to make sure that I would not give birth before I would sit for my board exams. And so we started trying in February of 2018 and we got it on the first try. And when we found out that we were pregnant, that we were just overjoyed, emotional, scared, anxious, really every emotion you can think of all at once, which is a lot to process. You think you are ready, but no one is ever ready. No matter what age you are, no one is ever ready. No one really knows what they're getting into. We have ideas of it, but we don't really know what it's like until we get into that position. But I really had an amazing pregnancy. I had an amazing birth. And it was really a wonderful experience from beginning to end.
I love that. How would you describe balancing school? What would you say were some of the biggest challenges and how you navigated them?
So I was in a unique situation in that I was working full time and pretty much in a full time physical therapy program.
Wow.
And then on top of that, to be in this program, it required me, it was like 5 hours away. So I had to drive to school every other weekend for labs, for the, clinical portion of and testing. And so it was definitely a challenge between not feeling 100% to increased breaks for bladder breaks to just overall fatigue on top of working. At that point, I wasn't working full time. I have to say, I think at that point, I was doing more PRN work at the hospital. It definitely took its toll on my body, but looking back, I wouldn't have done it any other way. It was perfect for what we needed. It was perfect for the family we were building. And again, I think because I wasn't working full time, I was working part time at that point. It really made it a lot easier for me to balance. Of course, my husband was taking on the bigger burden of financially sustaining us. And that allowed for me to have more rest time, more study time to make sure that I passed my boards the first time as well. And so it was a lot of communication and supporting each other in the things that we needed to be supported in.
I love that. And I definitely commend you for juggling all of that. That is phenomenal. You have so much on your plate.
Mm.
I can't even imagine. And I kind of want to go back to, and this is something that I think about a lot personally as well, is that I agree. I feel like you're never going to be like fully 100% ready. I feel like
Right.
from what I've learned and from what I've heard from folks is that you're always learning something and honestly, sometimes I'll be honest, it seems a little scary at times, especially if you're coming at it, as a first time parent. And my husband and I had a similar discussion. We're probably just going to be like a one and done. By the time we have a child, we'll be in probably our 40s. So he'll be in his mid 40s. So there's some things I want to consider there. But I want to transition into your experience as a women's health clinician. What would you say are some of the most common fertility challenges that you see in your patients, especially for someone who might be looking towards motherhood at maybe an older age?
So in general, women have fertility issues with things like PCOS, endometriosis, and with any history of pelvic inflammatory disease. And of course, there's also non-medical issues per se that can cause difficulty with fertility, like vaginismus or unconscious contracting of the pelvic floor muscles when it comes time to have some form of penetration to allow for pregnancy to occur. And a lot of times, I have friends who have had to go through like IUI or IVF, and some of them have had great experiences, and some of them, had multiple rounds and didn't get pregnant. But I have a particular friend, when they got rid of their stress and got control of their stress, really looked at how they're eating and lived life, they got pregnant on their own without any assistance, right? And so a lot of times we undervalue the role that appropriate self-care, health, wellness, nutrition, and mental health has in fertility. So yes, the pelvic health is very important, but sometimes that's all people focus on and they go to the OBGYN and then that's it, right? And so we have to look at the whole person, and it's not just the woman. We have to look at the man as well and make sure that they're healthy, not doing any behaviors that would decrease the likelihood of healthy sperm and all of that.
What misconceptions would you say that there are about fertility and pelvic health that maybe you'd like to clear up for any of us or any of our listeners?
I mean, I think a lot of people think, even, I thought at 34 that I was an older mom, right? They try to throw these geriatric terms
Oh, yeah.
at us, right? But, my mom was 40 when she had me. I was the last of six. I've met people on Instagram who have had children at 46. These aren't the stories that are glorified. These aren't the stories that are spoken about, but they need to be, because these things are happening. How many people are in perimenopause and they think they're done having children, and then they have an oops baby. They have baby they weren't expecting. Or people who, they're on Ozempic and they didn't realize that Ozempic made their birth control not work properly, right? And then they become pregnant. So there's lots of stories of the ability to conceive when you didn't think you could. And we need to hear more of those stories. I think that it's pretty bleak out there for some women and some families, and we really need to hear more of the positive stories.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, it wasn't until recently that I heard about this term called Ozempic babies. And now that you mentioned that, now I know what it means.
Yes.
So looking back, is there anything that maybe you wish you had known prior to starting your journey? And how would you say your thyroid surgery impacted your journey?
So I just on a whim happened to tell my gynecologist that we were going to be trying soon. And she was like, oh, well, then you need to have your thyroid problem addressed. I had no idea that thyroid issues apparently they can cause abnormal fetal development and fetal anomalies. And so once she told me that, I said, well, this needs to be addressed. And I'm over here thinking that I'm like a ticking time bomb because I'm about to be 34 and I don't want to be a geriatric mom. So I rushed to have, all the studies done, and I rushed to come up with the treatment plan that would get me pregnant as soon as possible. So initially they said that one of the treatment options was nuclear iodine. And one of my first questions was, okay, if we do that, does that take care of all of it? No. And then two, they said, and then I asked, how soon can I get pregnant after that? They said, after treatment, you have to wait a year.
Oh, wow.
So I'm already thinking like, this is messing my time, this is messing with my timeline. And I said, okay, what are my other options? They said, we can remove it. You have to be on medication for the rest of your life, but we can remove it. And because in the past, I've worked with physicians, and I will never forget a patient that was maybe in her late 60s or 70s, and she had thyroid cancer. And she told me, 10 years ago, I wish I would have just done the surgery and removed my thyroid. And that always stuck with me. And, I said, you know what? Let's just get rid of it. I'll take the medication for the rest of my life. Let's just get rid of it so I can get pregnant and have my child sooner rather than later. And the surgery went well. It was during one of my rotations. And so I asked for Friday off so that I could have my surgery. And then I was back at rotation in the clinic seeing patients as a physical therapy student on Monday. And the pathology report came back that I did have a little bit of cancer cells found in there. So I was so glad that I had it removed. And had I not decided to have a child, I probably would still have that in my body, not knowing it right now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's so great that you discovered that so early on. And it sounded like, it was meant to go that way, even though as scary as it sounds, having to be on medication for the rest of your life is such a big deal. But it sounds like it ended up being for the best.
Right.
And being able to be in charge of your health in that way is so important. If someone suspects maybe any thyroid issues, or maybe any sort of pelvic floor dysfunction, or might you advise them to maybe start seeking help?
Well, for thyroid issues, you have to see a medical doctor. So you can start with your primary care physician if there's a long wait for an endocrinologist, but they should be doing a full thyroid panel. And they're going to ask you some questions about fatigue, weight gain, hair loss, things like that. And then if you believe you have pelvic floor dysfunction, especially if you think it's affecting your ability to have pleasurable intercourse to then have a healthy pregnancy, then you should see a pelvic floor physical therapist. There's a lot of different reasons for why you would see a pelvic floor physical therapist. But, the summary is if you're having any bowel, bladder, or sexual dysfunction, whether you're male or female, you should see a pelvic floor physical therapist.
Good to know. And with any sort of bowel dysfunction, it's not something that you would often think is associated. So I feel like that's really helpful. I mean, not only just to me, but our listeners as well. Like it's not something that you think might be related.
Yes. And pretty much almost everyone I see has some form of constipation. They're not aware of it. And so we go over what normal or quote unquote normal should be. We go over what how best to set yourself up for success, to feel well in your body when it comes to bowel health. And then we actually go over how do you actually poop correctly? Because that can have repercussions down the line for your health, whether it's your pelvic health, whether it's, preparing for your baby and when you deliver, or as an older person, because when we get older, the tendency is to get more constipated, right? And so if you're doing this incorrectly as a young adult and an adult, and then you go into your older years and you're doing this incorrectly, then this can have significant effects on your blood pressure and on your, life expectancy.
Interesting. And I feel like it's a topic that not many of us give too much thought into. And I will say, as someone with IBS, this is actually eye-opening for me as well, just like to realize that how all of these moving parts come together and affect so many different parts of our health. And how would you say our partners can best support through these fertility challenges?
I think playing an active role is so important, not just a supportive role, but actively seeing physically and mentally what they need to do for themselves, in addition to supporting their partner through their role in it. Because again, so often we are putting so much pressure on women because the woman is who carries. But before, there has to be a lot that goes into it before conception even occurs. We have to look at the quality of life, the quality, physical activity levels. I think there was a recent study about the connection to cardiovascular health for mom and dad even before you get pregnant. And you want to look at nutrition. Again, you want to look at stress levels. All those things affect the quality of your sperm and egg, and it's going to affect the development of the child.
Gosh, that's so true. And I think, as you mentioned, a lot of it ends up falling on who's caring. We don't often think about the importance or the impact our partner's health might have on a child or pregnancy. I feel like there's not a whole lot of awareness brought to that, and not even necessarily specifically when it comes to getting pregnant or fertility, but the health of the child. And a lot of it just like, it's the person who becomes pregnant and how she nourishes herself and how much activity. And, so I feel like it's just so important to bring that level of awareness that the health of both partners really does matter.
Yes, I think they're even starting to look at data that might indicate that preeclampsia may be caused by the father's DNA.
Wow, interesting.
And the effects on the placenta. So we really need to start looking at this as, a team effort before the baby is conceived.
Absolutely. And how would you say has becoming a mother really shaped your approach also as a clinician?
I think I can better relate to my patients, especially the patients who are having trouble creating space and prioritizing their needs. I can help assist them through coming to terms with why it's important for their needs to also be met, but how to actively create the space for them to do the things they need to do for themselves. So, for example, traditionally in physical therapy, you give someone a home exercise program and it's, you need to do these 4 to 5 exercises, 3 sets of 10. It'll probably take you 20 minutes. And some moms might say, I don't have 20 minutes. I literally do not have 20 minutes to myself to do these things. And I get it. And so my job is to try to find in their regular routine where they can fit an exercise here or there that when you sum it all together equals the work they need to do for themselves. And so I think that's a huge benefit. I don't think enough physical therapists do that. I think more of us need to have that kind of a mindset to assist really all of our patients, because not only moms have trouble with this, everyone does. And we need to help people find their pathway to better physical health. And that might look different than what has been traditionally considered.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think it can really be individualized, and, all of our lifestyles can be so different. And, like some folks are more active than others. And hey, if you're able to, work out for an hour a day, for example, that's great for many of us, for working, going to school and juggling multiple things. Maybe we can only spare maybe 20, 30 minutes. And I still think like it's better than nothing because I feel like
Mhm.
so many of us go for this all in or nothing mentality. And let's say if we're not getting in our 45 to an hour workout a day, we're like, oh my gosh, a lot of times we'll
Mhm.
end up skipping it and we skip another day. And so I feel like when it comes to building habits, to really take baby steps to start small, even if let's say maybe it's 10 minutes and maybe you work up to 15, 20 minutes, so on and so forth, you're still getting in that activity. And just even making small changes can make all the difference because again, like a lot of us were like, we're not going to be able to go from zero to running a marathon tomorrow. We have to really
Mhm.
build up to that. And I feel like if we do try to jump into, say, running that marathon and we're not succeeding at that, we're like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. And so it
Mhm.
ends up becoming this cycle. And it really just kind of takes reminding ourselves that it's going to really just take time to build up those healthy habits. And there's like little things that we can do every day that can improve our health. And we may not even think about it. We don't have to go from sodas and pizza, for one day to only eating salads the next day because, who wants to do that, right? But
Mhm.
just like small changes and building up, it's like building on those habits and you really get used to it. Otherwise, it's like we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Absolutely. I'll give you a personal story. So after I had my daughter, I became like a really big fan of the Peloton. And that's how I got into shape afterwards. And I was getting up at like 4:30 in the morning and I did that for about a year and it was great. But recently I haven't been able to get back to that. And one day I said, okay, I'm going to get back. My plan is just to get up. I'm just going to try to get up at that time and that's it. So I got up and I actually ended up doing like 10 minutes core. I'm like, at least it's on the ground. Okay. 10 minutes of core. That's my goal. And then after that, what I did was I fell asleep, fell asleep for about 10 more minutes, woke up and then got ready for the rest of my day. And the next day, I kind of built up on that. And so again, baby steps, small steps will snowball into more of a routine that you can maintain into the lifestyle changes that everybody keeps talking about, right?
Absolutely. Is there any specific lifestyle changes that you really feel are crucial or any that you feel like we should prioritize to maybe improve our reproductive health?
I would say having more intercourse will make it over time more pleasurable. Your body just kind of like gets used to it, gets ready, gets revved up faster as far as the actual baby making. We have to remember that it can't be robotic. It's got to be pleasurable because the body's going to know. And I think there's been studies about that when it's more pleasurable for the female, that they're more likely to get pregnant. And then the other thing I have to say is in general, it's important that we really take care of our stress levels and our mental health. We really don't completely understand the role that our mental health and our stress levels has on our overall neurological system and how that then affects our health. And so making sure that we do the things that help decrease the excitability of our nervous system throughout the day, not just, oh, I'm going to do yoga once a week. That's not enough. It's got to be a technique that you use on a regular basis to be able to relax the mind and relax the nervous system and bring you back down to Zen.
Yeah, I love that. And stress that stress or the lack of it, I should say, has such a big impact on our body. And, it makes so much sense that, especially when we think about our cortisol levels and whether or not we're able to lose weight, it affects so many other areas of our lives that it only makes sense that it can have a positive or negative effect on our reproductive health, depending on how much or how little or of stress that we have in our lives. And kind of going back to feeling pleasure, it makes so much sense. And I feel like it's not something a lot of folks really give a whole lot of thought to. And I feel like, like, especially if you are really active in trying to conceive, I think it can almost become laborious or it could become automatic. And you're not really thinking like, yes, this should still be pleasurable. We're trying to achieve something, right? But this should still be enjoyable. And I appreciate that you mentioned that because I feel like the act of trying to conceive, so many think that, oh, we just got to get this done. We got to have intercourse so many times a week and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And that makes it a tedious task.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that sucks the fun out of it. And it really, you want your child to be conceived out of love and joy, and what best way to do that than to make sure that you and your partner are having and enjoying, the act.
Oh, 100%. And so kind of thinking about all of the different roles our lifestyle plays into fertility, reproductive health. Is there anything specific that you really, if our listeners walked away with one thing from listening to this episode, what would it be?
I think that oftentimes we put a lot of faith in physicians to give you all the information. And sometimes they don't have all the information. And unfortunately, they also then don't point you in the right direction. So I think that anyone who is unsure of their fertility status or is maybe anxious or worried about it, they should be doing as much as they can to get as much information about their health status. So that means making sure that they go to their PCP or their primary care physicians and get a physical. If they want to go to dive deeper to someone who's going to be more holistic, I would say go see a functional medicine provider. That could be a physician or it could be a nurse practitioner who's going to look at the entire system, the whole body, and help you make sure that you are where you want to be and assist you in getting you to where you want to be in order to achieve the goals you want to achieve.
Oh, so wonderfully said. And I want to stress that it can be hard, especially I feel like for women, and it's something that I've personally experienced as well, is that when it comes to our health, we really have to be our own best advocates. And that can be really hard, whether it's we're seeing a position and we feel like maybe it's not really the best fit, seeking out, multiple opinions when it's needed. It's really, really so important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so many people go to see their provider and they have a certain end result in their mind and then they don't get it and they feel deflated and defeated. But, a lot of times what I do with my pelvic floor patients is just coach them on what to say to their physicians. Okay, you're seeing the urogynecologist. Tell them this is what you're feeling because this is what you told me. Tell them this is what you want. And if they say no, ask them why not? What's their differential diagnosis? And can they just write the order anyway? What's the big deal? Just write the order. And so, being able to advocate for yourself is super, super important, and making sure that you have the support to do that, to get the confidence, to feel encouraged to do that.
Yeah. And I think another common one that I see about a lot is, if you're beginning your fertility journey and, once you conceive, there are so many different options that you have to explore, whether you want to have a traditional birth or at home birth, or whether you want a doula or so on and so forth. What would you advise anyone who might be exploring all those different paths and they aren't sure like what path to go down? How might you advise them with all this information that they're faced with?
So I would ask them to make sure that they're looking at all their options. So if they want a hospital or if they're thinking about doing a hospital birth, visiting the hospital that is nearby. If they have a birth center, visit the birth center. Talk to all these places about their policies. Grab different books that help you with deciding all these things, whether you're going to do a home birth or a water birth, a birth center or hospital. There's so many options. And a lot of it does come down to your pregnancy risk status, whether you're low risk or high risk. And sometimes you really have to discuss, why you are high risk if you're high risk with your physician, to discernment if it's really a valid reason for you to be high risk. Sometimes you're considered high risk because of trivial things like your age, right?
Yeah.
And so if beyond that, if your physician isn't just is only looking at that and isn't looking at the big picture, then you may want to consider other options, maybe a different physician or different, like a midwife, maybe who's more holistic and more hands off. My recommendation would be to look at all the options, consider the pros and cons, talk to your partner about what their feelings are as well, and consider everything. I personally had a hospital birth. I had a great birth. The hospital near me was a mile away, so that was very convenient. I did have a doula, which I do recommend that everyone has a doula, someone who's going to be supportive and someone who's going to watch out for mom, because a lot of times once the baby arrives, everyone's taking care of the baby and no one's really looking at mom. And so I think the doula studies have shown that doulas are dramatically improve outcomes for pregnant moms. And so just looking at all the options, weighing them, and consider your status. It's a hard decision, but at the end of the day, for the most part, no matter what you decide, you and baby will do great. But sometimes we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves. So just remember that.
Absolutely, 100%. And at the end of the day, like, we have so many options, and at times, honestly, it can feel like information overload, but really this is so important. It's probably, I want to say, one of the most important decisions that you do make, because, this is your baby, and this is such a big, other than maybe getting married, this is like one of the probably going to be the biggest days of your life. Yeah, so it's really been a pleasure chatting with you. Before we close out, can you share with our listeners where they can connect with you and learn more about your work?
Sure. So on Instagram, I'm at the pelvic trainer. I am a pelvic floor physical therapist. I do see patients in Davie, Florida. I see patients via telemedicine as well, especially for birth preparation. And my website is www.jaept.com.
Awesome. I'll make sure I get those down in the show notes. I'll make sure I connect with you as well. And I'm really excited for our listeners to learn more from our episode. And I'm so excited to share it. And I know our audience will learn a lot as well. But thank you so much for joining. It's really been a pleasure, and it's been a beautiful conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you.